Okay, well, you want to start with the CBC this week, the National?
Sure.
And, Arsenault, who I've respected for years, Rosemary Barton, one of my favorite personalities, Andrew Chang, Ian Hannah-Mansing.
Yep, that's very good. Did you practice that?
See, you think I'm kidding, and how much I watch, how much of a news junkie I am as well.
He is a consumer.
But it's a really unique plan. There's some great people in it. Did you know that's the route they were going? What do you think of the route that they went?
I think it's, listen, you know the landscape's changing considerably in television, especially in news. You guys have changed the landscape in sports. You know, you've latched onto your own unique style and your own unique kind of program. News is changing too. The basics will always be the same. You know, good, solid journalism, trying to tell the story of the day. But we're always looking for new ways, and we're especially looking for new ways right now. And so you've taken 4 people here, all of whom are great journalists, but in different ways. They're very different. You know, Adrienne, you know, she's incomparable in terms of going into the field and getting the big story, and she'll still be doing that a lot. Rosie's a great interviewer. Ian's your kind of voice of stability. You know, he's a rock. And Andrew Chang brings a whole different perspective to the broadcast with the kind of experiences he's had so far, both in Montreal and of late in Vancouver. And he'll be especially concerned about making sure the show is updated. He'll stay in Vancouver and keep that show hot.
How tough was it to keep the national from one spot? Because that's one of the changes here. And I know, having traveled the country, that, you know, some people out west feel like they're slighted by the big, you know, powerful beast in Toronto, and that it can be tough. Is that part of the equation in having the
I think that is part of it. I mean, I spent the first 10 years of my career with the CBC in the West, and so I felt that too. You know, you always felt, it's so Toronto-centric, they don't understand us. Right. I can remember when I was in Saskatchewan filing reports, if it didn't have a grain elevator behind me, they'd say, well, no, you're not really in Saskatchewan, because there has to be a grain elevator there, no matter what the story was, right? You could be in downtown Regina, to have a grain elevator. So that's part of the situation of showing that you're in different places. Now, it's a challenge. It's technically a challenge. It's a resource issue as well. I mean, we're going to have crews in a number of different places as a result of having different studios. So we'll see how that plays out. We've tried it before, and it's been difficult. Other networks have tried that before as well. So we'll see how that works out.
Right. Any advice to the group of 4? I know there's a lot of experience there, obviously, but if you could give advice, even in this new type of format, what would you say? Well,
you got to be patient. You know, I met with them last night after it was finally announced, and we had a great little meeting. But talking to them, to, you know, trust the people they work with. That there's a really, you know, Knowlton gave me a note the day that I took over in 1988, and it basically was, you know, you've got a great team there. You will thrive with it, and you'll love it. And I took copies of the note, I gave it to each one of them, the 4, and I said, look, this still holds true like it did 30 years ago. You do have a great team to do this program. You've got to trust them. You know, they're on your side. And you will get better. You'll thrive on it. They're all terrific already, but they will get better as a result of that, and they'll love it.
When you mentioned how we've kind of grasped something that's a little bit different in this genre, I was thinking about how sports news and news have their similarities, although the consequences are a lot different in the two. And when I stole the line edutainment, I took it really seriously, and I find that my role on this show oftentimes is to separate fact from opinion and hope the viewer knows it, knowing full well that half the time the viewer does not know the difference between the fact and the opinion.
I thought your role in here was to, you know,
to make sure I'm not eating on air. That's his actual role, aside from edutainment.
Other than that, other than doing what you were about to suggest, I thought my role was. Is that where news took a turn, when opinion and news became intertwined, or was that already kind of happening?
That's not a good thing when that happens. I mean, we have a 1-hour program which mixes news and current affairs, and current affairs can get into opinion, but the news portion of the program should be just that, news without opinion, and allow viewers to make up their own mind, lay out the facts, you know, put them in context, be fair, be accurate, let viewers decide for themselves how they want to feel about things. Where it gets difficult is when it sort of goes from news to entertainment. And we went through a kind of crisis period in news in the 90s when it was everything from O.J. Simpson to Lorena Bobbitt. Remember that story? Yeah. There were a bunch of them there where suddenly they were being treated as legitimate big-time news stories.
Because they were selling.
Because they were selling. Yeah. And it's a slippery slope when you head that way. And we, of all networks, can't go there. You know, we're the public broadcaster. We've got to be serious. We've got to deal with serious issues, but do them in such a way that it will appeal to a broad audience. And that's a challenge. And this is one way we're trying now of going about it with, you know, it's not just there's going to be 4 anchors, but I think when you see the program, it sounds like the 3 tenors, right? But you know, it's the approach they'll take to doing serious news in new and different ways in a digital age. I mean, it's going to be exciting.
You have stepped aside at a very unique time in terms of covering news, in terms of what's in the news. I mean, we have a young prime minister who's the envy of certain parts of the world. He's on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine.
Well, you've been on that, haven't you?
Twice. It's not a big deal.
No, it's not a big deal. I mean, really.
You know, I'm shooting for Esquire, but whatever. You turn on some of the American newscasts. I'll try and segue with that.
I was afraid of what you were shooting for a second. I'm shooting for, oh no.
You know what I'm really going for. We'll talk about it later. We'll talk about it later with a Diet Coke. And you have stories breaking in the States that in any other year would have been the biggest story of the month, and it's happening every day.
Every day.
Now that you've stepped aside, your opinion on where we're at, from a news standpoint, from an information standpoint, from the separation of fact and entertainment standpoint.
Well, I mean, the equation's changed totally because of what's going on in the States. I mean, you hit it on the head. It changes every day, and the definition of normal is changed as a result. You know, the stories a week ago, you can't even remember them. They were outrageous things that were happening, but they've already been taken over by other outrageous stories that are coming out of the White House. And we're so focused on what's happening there, perhaps too focused. I know some viewers are saying, you know, forget about it. You know, I've heard enough about Trump. I don't want to hear anymore. But how do you walk away from some of this stuff? You know, it's pretty hardcore news. And it has an impact on all of us. It has an impact on the NAFTA negotiations. It has an impact on, you know, on world peace. It has an impact on, you know, the climate change situation. All the big issues that confront us, including here in Canada, are impacted by some of the things that are going on in the States. Now, do we ignore what's going on in our own country to cover that? That becomes one of the dilemmas that we all face in the business. There's some great journalism going on. You know, at a time when people were saying journalism's in effect dead, especially some elements of it, print journalism, nightly network newscasts, it's not. It's on a huge rebound. And you look in the States, you got some of the best political journalism in the last 50 years, since Watergate. And, you know, I'm old enough to remember what that was like, occurring now. Washington Post, New York Times, subscriptions are up, profits are up, and the journalism is outstanding. I mean, I don't know how they're going to come up with awards this year because there's so many great journalists. But it's in a way, all the stuff about fake news and condemning you know, journalism has actually shown how strong journalism is and can be. Highlighted, you know, it highlights the strengths. Also, you know, puts out front the weaknesses. But there's a lot of strong journalism going on right now, and you know, we're feeding off that too.
It seems obvious to me that, and you can agree or disagree with the statement, it seems obvious to me, though, that a lot of the news outlets and sources are being weighed on one side of the divide or the other, and almost being used as propaganda depending on who you believe or what side of the fence you seem to weigh on. Is there any way that we can get away from that moving forward? Is that a goal
I think in the States as well as in Canada, there is a real divide between left and right, certainly the extremes,
yes,
and that's not going to change. How does journalism deal with the issues at hand right now? The journalists deal with it by doing their job, and doing their job as well or better than they've ever done it, and that's what they've got to do. Will you get criticized along the way? Absolutely. But that's okay, as long as you can defend what you're doing. And I think you see that happening in the States, and you know, I think you'll see the same thing happen here. There are real issues at play in Canada. They're different than the ones that are underlined in the States right now, but there's a demand on the part of many Canadians that certain issues be addressed, and many people feel they're not being addressed well enough now.
In the clip that we ran off the front of this, when I was lucky enough to be in your office before you kicked me out, just to see the pictures on this man's walls of his history in the business, it was like walking through the Smithsonian very quickly.
Geez,
I'm serious. Like, just, it was incredible. Yeah. And your highs in this business, in this industry, are obvious. I'm wondering what your biggest professional regret was.
Biggest regret? You know, it's hard to have one because I've been lucky, and that wall attests to it. You know, I've seen a lot of things, met a lot of people, and you know, been around the world more than a few times. You know, I regretted certain interviews I never got. You know, I tried awfully hard to get Trump over the last few years. Didn't get that. Didn't get George Bush. Wanted that. But you know, overall, it's you know, it's hard to complain about the luck I had. I guess if I had one professional regret, it was that I never was able to manage two languages, and especially the two official languages of the country. And I regret that, because I don't think we should ever be in that position. Of a person in the job I held, I think you got to be able to talk at ease with leaders, whether they're political leaders or sports leaders or whomever, in both languages. And I you know, often tell a story about back in the days when there was constitutional crisis after constitutional crisis, and the premiers and the prime minister would meet, and they'd all have scrums at the end of the day. And I can remember going to a Bourassa scrum, the Quebec premier, and you know, the Quebec media was all over him, and they were firing questions at him in French, obviously, and he was answering that way. And then he saw me, and he went, "Oh, Peter, you must have a question," in English, right? So on the one hand, I was kind of flattered that he recognized who I was, but on the other hand, I was really embarrassed that he had to depart from the language he was in, recognize me because he knew that I couldn't speak French. And you know, I think that's unfortunate, and I regret that.
Part of the sentence that you threw out there, or one of the sentences you threw out there, is you had to feel at ease talking with world leaders, and all of those people that are up on the wall that Sid said reminded him of the Smithsonian. And what jumped to my mind was, even in the tribute when they renamed the lower atrium at the CBC building, Mansbridge Hall, and former prime ministers are laying down video tributes, Wayne Gretzky, Sidney Crosby.
Yeah, I noticed you guys weren't in there.
Yeah, no one.
One day.
Surprisingly, nobody asked us.
Shockingly, yeah.
Scott told me that he was working on it.
Yeah, the email got lost.
The atrium here for you guys.
Oh, the atrium here?
Oh, right.
The cafeteria for me, actually.
Right by the chicken fingers. Yeah. Is there anyone in the midst of, as you were ready to step down, where you were like, I'm really glad I got to meet blank, or I'm really glad that this person influenced my life in whatever way, shape, or form?
You know, a lot of people influenced my life, the people that I covered, and they weren't the people you would think of. They weren't the big names. They weren't the, you know, whether it was Obama or either the Trudeaus or Harper or whomever. And it wasn't the Crosbys and the Bobby Orrs, as much as I loved talking to them. It was people, ordinary people, literally ordinary people with extraordinary stories to tell. those are the ones that had an impact on me. Made me think about the wider world. Made me think about caring about, you know, the plight of others. You know, whether it was somebody caught up in a war-torn country, or, you know, had been affected by a natural disaster, or had simply been, you know, I can remember from my earliest days as a reporter in Churchill, Manitoba, watching them pulling bodies out of a house that had burned, and talking to the survivors. You know, those things you never forget, and they have an impact on you. And so for those moments, you feel a more complete person, because you have a better understanding of what the real issues are that face people. The famous people, you know what it's like when you have somebody come in here.
Doesn't faze me anymore, Peter.
I've seen
whatever.
You know, dribbling around there when you're...
When's the last time you were starstruck?
You mean before today? I'll tell you the time I was most starstruck. When I was a kid growing up in Ottawa, after we'd moved here from... we were immigrants, you know. We were born in England, raised in Southeast Asia, and came to Canada in the 50s. And my heroes were, in the 50s and 60s, were in hockey, were Dickie Duff, who played for the Leafs, and then the Canadians and countless other teams, and Ronnie Lancaster. He was the quarterback, first for the Ottawa Rough Riders, and then Saskatchewan. And so, but Ron Lancaster, more than anybody. And I can remember in 1976 or 77, whenever it was he was retiring, I was working in Regina then, and I went out to his house to interview him. And it was the first time I'd met him. And I was so nervous I could barely speak.
Just had that effect.
It had that effect, yeah. I was like so nervous.
So did he like mess with you? Did he realize you were that nervous?
No, he didn't. And afterwards, you know, we became friends because he worked for the CBC, and him and Don Whitman and others, we used to kid around a lot. But I was starstruck then. But other than that, I mean, I remember going to the White House to do Obama, and it was a big deal. It was a big moment for the CBC and for us, and for me, because we'd never done a interview with a president in the White House before, but I wasn't starstruck. I mean, it was neat. It was it was exciting, and I'm glad it happened. But starstruck, Ron Lancaster.
Lancaster, that's a different story. Yeah. So we've gone way longer than we should have, but I'm sorry.
I said I'd only come for an hour.
All right.
You know, so they kind of guaranteed me an hour.
All right. Well, we got to show you. We got to give you the tour afterwards. Fill out the hour. If you pay for an hour. Well, let
better excuse for my hour.
Let's end this way. Sure. Aside from growing a kick-ass beard,
I like that, eh?
What does the future hold for Peter?
I was going to do the Letterman thing, but no.
Well, I
actually trim it.
He's entering Lord of the Rings stage with his beard, right? Like you're not. Yeah. No. You're just up and off for a little bit. What's next for Peter Mansbridge besides you and me hanging? We should go to a water park this summer or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There have been a number of approaches to me about things, including from the CBC, and obviously my natural, in terms of broadcast, I turned down the offer here at Sportsnet.
What was the time slot that they were offering?
Well, it was, like. I assume you heard about it.
We'll talk about it later. Yeah, it's not important.
I mean, Scott wanted, Tim to have a new partner kind of thing, but that's different. You don't want to know about that.
My soul has been crushed.
You had a shot.
I had a shot.
You had a shot.
It was only a matter of time. The second the national gig was done, he was coming in.
Yeah, no, I probably documentary work if I stay in broadcasting, and I have some exciting possibilities.
Still the travel bug? Would you go?
Oh yeah, yeah. But it'll be outside of the national. Like I've retired from the CBC, so if I do work for the CBC, it'll be on a freelance basis, and we'll see. But I mainly want to kind of enjoy my time. Now I worked my backside off for almost 50 years, 49 years, And so trips like I've just been on with my family to Scotland for the last few weeks, and golfing, and just enjoying life at a leisurely pace has been great.
Enjoy the good life. I meant it when I said it at the start. There are a few privileges that we get hosting this show, and you've known it from the past from hosting your show. This is definitely one of them. Thank you very much for popping
Thank you so much for that.
Sitting and talking with us.
Yeah, you guys are great. We love watching you, and my son's a huge fan of yours. So.
Nice. We know the one person who watches the show.
Maybe two.
Yeah. Two. Sorry, there's two people. In case you don't know, it's Peter Mansbridge.